Qua? 8. Yes. Well, I'm going to go back to not the English, so I can tell people to click on to English. Oh. Okay. The attendees can't see the chat though.
No,
Okay.
they can't see the chat. Okay, I'm gonna start letting people in. I don't know what's.
I'm still kind of slow when it comes to this stuff.
Okay, we got 4 people in the waiting room.
So good evening, everyone. Welcome. Before we begin, I would like to direct your attention to this screen. We are presenting tonight in English, and we have simultaneous translation in Korean, Mandarin, and Cantonese. So I can direct your attention to the bottom right of your Zoom screen. You'll see a circle that looks like a globe that says interpretation. Please click on the language that you prefer to listen. to this presentation in. So if it's English, please click English. If it's Korean, please click Korean, and so on. And we'll give a few minutes for everyone to complete that function. I'm just going to give everyone a few more minutes. We're just going to give it a few more minutes for everyone to please select a language. And the way you can do that is by going to the bottom right of your Zoom screen. There's an icon that has a circle with a globe and it says interpretation. If you click on that icon, you can select English, Chinese, Korean, or Cantonese. And please make that selection now. All right, we're going to get started. I'm going to click on the English channel. All right. And Francis, if you could put on that first slide. Thank you. So good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Asian American Bar Association of New York Housing webinar. My name is Karen Lynn, and I am a co-chair of the Pro Bono and Community Services Committee. I am also have been an attorney for the past 25 years, and I am a former judge of the Housing Court in New York City, and I will be your moderator this evening. The panelists will explain the current eviction moratoriums and how they affect tenants. They will also explain what to do if you are served with papers, and they will also explain what are the current procedures in housing court during the pandemic. You are able to ask questions as they come up through using your question and answer feature in Zoom. You can type that in and we will answer all questions at the end. We will also have an open question and answer period where you can unmute yourself and ask questions. This presentation is being simultaneously translated into Korean, Mandarin, and Cantonese as well. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce the panelists for tonight. Jonathan D. Hernandez is a staff attorney with the Legal Aid Society Bronx Neighborhood Office, where he primarily focuses on eviction defense and civil litigation. Prior to the Legal Aid Society, Jonathan advocated on behalf of tenants in affirmative housing cases involving building-wide repairs in Queens and in Manhattan through Asian Americans for Equality. Rena Gurung is a housing court attorney currently assigned to Richmond County Housing Court. Prior to the court system, Rena was a tenants' rights staff attorney at Legal Services NYC. She serves as a board chair at Adhikar, which is a woman-led nonprofit organization committed to improving the lives of Nepali and Tibetan-speaking population at the local, state, and national level. Both Jonathan and Rena are co-chairs of the Government Service and Public Interest Committee of the Asian American Bar Association. Please note that the comments that are being shared by our speakers as well as myself are our own, and we're speaking in our personal capacity, and they do not reflect that of our employers. That was our legal disclaimer. So I would like to turn this over to Jonathan to start us off on housing, the current state of housing in New York City.
Good evening, everyone. I want to welcome you to our eviction moratorium presentation. We're hoping to cover a lot of things that are probably on your mind and have those that information available to the community in their preferred languages. So the first topic I wanted to discuss tonight was dispelling these types of myths and rumors about the eviction moratorium. We've been in the pandemic for almost a year now, and there's a lot of misinformation about the eviction moratorium and who's exactly protected and what exactly are the rights of the tenants. So I wanted to first address those first. So eviction moratorium, it is not a rent collection moratorium. During this time, the landlords can't evict tenants from their homes, but that doesn't mean that the rent collection stops. The landlord can still collect rent in non-payment cases and can proceed in certain eviction or housing court proceedings, which I'll get to in a little bit. There's also a campaign called Cancel Rent. I could see some people misinterpreting that rent is now canceled. It is not. Just to be, it's an aspiration for those campaigns, and that will be ultimately up to the New York State Legislature or the federal government if rent will be indeed canceled. But for the moment, it's not. Like I said before, rent is could still be collected by the landlord. And then last, misconception, I believe General Punk may be having is that the COVID-19 pandemic is not a complete defense in your housing court case. Unfortunately, the pandemic is this. It costed a lot of time and effort. It's been this disaster for that we're all going through, but unfortunately, it's still the contracts and rental agreements that you went into before the pandemic still stand, but there's organizations and people still working on trying to make that have rent be to figure out a way that rent to be paid and protect tenants from being evicted from their homes. I will now pass it on to Rena, who will cover Housing 101 to give a brief overview of Housing Court.
Thank you, Jonathan and Karen. Good evening, everyone. I'm just going to cover what is Housing Court. Housing Court is a trial court without a jury. So a judge decides the case. There is one branch of Housing Court in every borough in New York City. Most boroughs have more than one judge and different parts. The only borough that does not have multiple judges is Staten Island, which is Richmond County. Housing court proceedings generally are called summary proceedings. So these cases might take 1, 2, or few appearances when the case is done with. Many of the cases settle, and very few of them make it to trial. Now, there are two types of major cases that comes to Housing Court. One type of case is landlord initiated. So these are non-payment of rent cases or holdover cases. Non-payment of rent basically means the tenant failed to make payments of their rents, and the landlord is asking the court to give them money as well as possession, meaning give back the apartment to the landlord. Holdover means, for whatever reason, the landlord wants the property back and that the tenant is holding over the apartment, and the landlord is seeking in this type of cases primarily to get back the property. So even if the tenant wanted to pay rent generally, or had the ability to pay rent, generally these are the cases where lease has expired or there's some kind of nuisance activity and the landlord wants the property back. So that's the landlord side. Now there's the other side of Housing Court, which is either a tenant initiated case or the City of New York HPD initiated case. Now the tenant part is, there could be something called illegal lockout, where the tenant alleges that the landlord illegally locked them out from the apartment without the judge's order. Or for HP action, which is basically asking the court for repairs that the landlord did not do, or because the landlord, quote unquote, harassed them. The other type of case is 7A proceeding, which is basically asking the court for a relief because the landlord failed to maintain their building. And in that particular case, the tenants are alleging that for whatever reason, landlords fail to maintain the building in a safe, healthy, health safety condition, without health safety hampering conditions. Now, in that case, what they're asking the court to do is assign an administrator who can manage the building. The other type of case is HPD initiated, which is the City of New York. Again, same thing. They are either asking for repairs to be done or to take over the building and assign an administrator. Now, when it comes to Housing Court, generally, historically speaking, there's been about 350,000 cases every year, and most of them end up being non-payment of rent case. Nevertheless, because of the pandemic last year, my understanding is the number has significantly decreased, but once all of these moratoriums and stays are lifted, then there is expectation that the number of eviction cases are going to grow. Now, as far as when a case is commenced, there's something called service requirement. So when a landlord starts a case, the petition cannot be served by the landlord. It has to be someone, a third party. So in a lot of cases, landlords use a process server. When it comes to service, there are 3 different types of services, but there's too much detail. Perhaps something that we can cover in another seminar, but not today. Just know that for tenant side and for landlord side, you got to make sure that you serve properly, because if the landlord does not serve the papers properly, then that's a defense to the tenant's case, and the case could be thrown out. And I think I'm gonna, shift this over to Jonathan, who can go over the important parts of the seminar.
Thank you, Rena. I think everything is important to the seminar, but that's definitely Housing 101. But what I want to focus on right now is the eviction moratorium itself. I'll get to the slide. So to fully understand the scope of the New York State eviction moratorium law that was passed in December 2020, I think we need to kind of rewind and take it back to the beginning of the pandemic, around March 2020, if you could believe. It's been almost a year since the pandemic started, and Governor Cuomo declared a COVID-19 emergency because of a public threat. This basically closed all housing court cases, stopped all housing court cases, and landlords weren't able to file new cases until later in the pandemic. Through a series of executive and administrative orders, eviction and foreclosure proceedings were on hold. Nobody could be evicted from their homes for certain types of cases, and everyone was holding their breath to see what was going to happen at the end of 2020 when the New York State eviction moratorium was going to be lifted. So when this New York State eviction moratorium was signed on December 28th, it basically gave a 60-day stay for certain housing court cases, such as non-pays and certain holdovers. There was one exception, which I will get to. And these eviction cases, non-pays and other holdovers, they wouldn't be heard until after February 26, 2021. So basically, they wouldn't be scheduled for until March 2021. The exception, though, that I want to highlight is the nuisance exception. Landlords can still proceed with nuisance holdovers if a nuisance, a common nuisance case is a landlord suing a tenant for making too much noise. Maybe they have a unruly pet, or they have something that they create a nuisance that creates objectionable conduct, and it's an ongoing and consistent nuisance behavior. And this type of case will proceed in housing court. Cases are still being heard at this moment, and they will continue throughout this stay, and then maybe after this pandemic, and definitely during the pandemic. What stops the cases from going forward in non-pays and non-nuisance cases is the New York State COVID-19 Hardship Declaration, which I will go into more detail, but for the purposes of right now, if a tenant or a legal occupant fills out a COVID-19 Hardship Declaration, they will have a stay in their case until after May 1st, 2021. That hopefully gives enough breathing room for tenants to figure things out, and also the government to, and the courts to figure out how to proceed with housing court cases and how they will move forward. So that's the New York State eviction moratorium. There's also a other moratorium which others might know about, and that's the federal CDC moratorium. It's the Center of Disease federal agency that passed a federal eviction moratorium for tenants that live in federal subsidized, federal funded buildings. And for some tenants and residents, this may have a lot of requirements. And this eviction moratorium is covered until the end of March 31st, 2021. So essentially, if a tenant has a federal subsidy, such as Section 8, or is part of a federal program, or the building was built or receives federal funding, this applies. I think the graph right next to in the slide kind of illustrates that tenants, there's an area where tenants are covered by both the New York State eviction law and then the CDC law, but I believe that the New York State eviction moratorium is stronger. And then I will pass that on to Rita, who will cover answering petitions in court.
Thank you, Jonathan. So I'm going to go over some updates on New York City housing court operations. Housing court is open, so people can come in or they can call. Obviously, the courts are not accepting hundreds of people simultaneously like before, but you can still have access to housing court right now. I'm going to go over non-payment of rent case, basically a petition. What happens when a tenant receives a non-payment of rent petition from the landlord? Now, the current law does not toll, meaning does not stop the time to answer a non-payment petition. Now, pursuant to HISPA, which is the law that passed in June 2019, answering period had been extended from 5 days to 10 days. So as soon as you receive the petition, you have 10 days to answer. Now you can answer orally or in writing. Generally, in the past, pre-COVID time, what tenants used to do is go to the courthouse, talk to the clerk, and give their answer orally, and then the clerk would, check in and then generate the form. Now what you can do is you can also call in, you can phone in the housing court to the borough that your case is going to be heard. So let's say, for example, your case is in the Bronx, you call the Bronx Housing Court, tell them you want to file an answer, and then they should be able to take the answer over the phone. Now, because of the pandemic, the court system also went electronic. So there's something called NICEF, which is the New York State electronic filing system. And if you have an email address and you have access to the petition that the landlord generated electronically, you can also go in and answer it via your computer. So you have options. The most important thing is, if there's anything that you don't know, you should just call the housing court and tell them you want to put in an answer, and they should be able to help you. Now, as far as so when you receive the petition does not have a court date on it. Once you answer, then the court assigns you with a court date, and that's the date that you come in. Now, if you choose to come in person, courts are allowing you to come in person, but the preferred method is virtually. So the court now operates via Microsoft Teams. So the court will give you the link to where you can appear from your computer or your phone, or if you don't have a video system, you can always, there is a phone number and a PIN, you can always call in during the appearance. And the other case, the type of case the landlord initiates, is called the holdover. Now, holdover petition traditionally actually had a date and time when you had to appear in court. Same thing, answer is done either orally or in person, in writing. But these days, due to the pandemic, the landlord cannot put in the date and time that the tenant should come in for their first appearance. So the petition is actually going to have to be determined. And then once the court schedules when the case is going to be heard, then the court sends out notification and whatnot. So again, anytime you have a question, I'm sure Jonathan is going to go over later on as to how tenants can get help, or even the help center for landlords. Those will be covered later, but most important thing is you can always call someone to seek assistance. Now Karen is it Jonathan or Karen? Someone is putting in the phone numbers for each housing court. This information is readily available in the court's website, but these are the phone numbers that you can call if you want to answer via phone. Now, as far as the, and one thing I guess that's really important is that even if you don't answer or come in person or something happens, the court cannot enter something called a default judgment. So basically a default judgment is if it's a non-payment rent case, tenant does not answer. Sorry. If you don't answer in a non-payment case, or in a holdover case, you don't appear in court, the court would enter something called a default judgment, meaning the tenant did not show up or tenant did not answer. But now with the new law, you can't do that.
如果您没有在法律要求您的时间出庭。
Excuse me, Xinyi, I believe you need to click on the Mandarin channel. Right now you're on the English channel. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. So default judgment cannot be issued by the court prior to a hearing through May 1st, 2021. So that's something that to keep in mind. But the most important thing is answer. Call someone, whether the help center or to answer the phone, or if you're a tenant, definitely call a tenant's attorney, and Jonathan later is going to give you all the information about how to get in touch with the lawyer. Jonathan, over to you.
Thank you, Rena. So I'm going to now discuss the Eviction Moratorium's COVID-19 Tenant Hardship Declaration. I just want to first highlight some of the form itself, the highlights of highlight the hardship declaration, and then we'll get to the form itself. So the tenant hardship declaration is available online. You could get it from using Google or going to nycourts.gov. You could also receive it from the court. From what I heard, the court mailed over 500,000 mailings of the declaration to tenants that have current housing court proceedings, and tenants and landlords are also required to mail the tenant hardship declaration to their tenants if they're in an active court proceeding and before initiating a new non-payment case or holdover case in housing court. That's not a nuisance case. The COVID-19 hardship declaration is available in many languages: English, Spanish, Arabic, Bengali, Chinese in simplified and traditional format, Haitian, Creole, Polish, Russian, and several other languages. I will highlight some of the languages that COVID-19 hardship declarations have been translated in just a few minutes. I think it's also important that to highlight the ways that the tenant hardship declaration could be submitted to the court. You could go in person. That's probably not the most preferred by the court, but you're still able to do that. You could also submit the hardship declaration by fax, by mail. I would highly suggest certified mail with return receipt, so you have proof that the court received it. And then there's also in the previous slide, email address for the certain borough that you have your housing court in. I will also have that available in a few minutes. Just to make sure you have a record of what you submit, I highly suggest that you take a picture on your phone, or you could copy it in using a copier, just to have proof that you submitted the hardship declaration. I would want to say that everything should run smoothly with the courts, but they, like I said, they sent out over 500,000 mailings. I just don't want tenants to have their hardship declaration to slip under the cracks. So it's best to keep copies of what you submit. I will now share what a COVID-19 hardship declaration looks like. So this is what the COVID-19 hardship declaration looks like in English. There is the notice page. This basically gives what I was basically talking about, that if a tenant is in a eviction proceeding that's not a nuisance case, if they fill out this COVID-19 hardship declaration and send it to the court or the landlord, they would be able to stay their case until at least May 1st, 2021. And that includes if you have an active case that you didn't settle yet, or if you had a case that was restored by the landlord, or you settled a case, but your landlord's going to bring you back to court because they know you, because you owe rent during the pandemic. So what I want to highlight here on the second page is you have to know your index number, your landlord tenant index number that's filed against you, or that is active in the New York City housing court system, and the county in court that it's filed under. So if you're in Brooklyn, Kings County, Richmond County, Queens County, or Bronx County, you would put the corresponding county with the housing court part that's where it's filed. This line here, you will be able to put your address, so the court knows what the subject premises is covered under the declaration. And I want to highlight this first sentence here. This sentence says, "I'm a tenant, lawful occupant, or other person responsible for paying rent." So you don't have to be a tenant of record or on the lease to fill out this COVID-19 hardship declaration. I think that when the New York State Legislature was kind of crafting this law, they knew the realities of New York City, and some people that are living in New York City apartments or New York State apartments, they may not be the tenant of record, but they might have a interest in the apartment, such as if they're a licensee or a potential person that has succession rights. They want to make sure that they're covered under this hardship declaration too. There are two options which the COVID-19 hardship declaration covers. First being financial hardship, and also secondly, if you or someone in your household has a significant health risk. I'm going to highlight first the financial hardship, but I do want to mention first that there's no proof. You don't need to submit proof that you have a financial hardship or a significant health risk when submitting this form. This is just in the bottom of the form. You are testing that you are submitting this under the penalty of perjury and the penalty of law, that these statements are true and not false. So that is the way of kind of verifying that that you are experiencing a financial hardship or significant health risk. The financial hardship, I would say it's very liberal. If you are experiencing higher expenses than usual, you are spending more time in the household. So you're in your apartment, you're spending more towards electricity. So I think that is covered under expenses. If you have childcare responsibilities that you now that you need to pay for because your child or your children are remote and you need to work and you need to pay for childcare responsibilities, that you were covered under the COVID-19 Hardship Declaration. And moving expenses, if you need to relocate because of the pandemic, and you experience a lot of out-of-pocket expenses. This is you are covered under the COVID-19 Hardship Declaration. And I think this is kind of the catch-all. Other circumstances relating to COVID-19 in financial hardships, you'd be covered. And then I'll go into the significant health risks. So I think it's important to note that it's not just the tenant of record or the person filling out the declaration that needs to be in danger of a significant health risk. It could be you or somebody in your household that has underlying conditions that can be exacerbated by being exposed to COVID-19. And if somebody in the household is above 65 or has a disability, those are other significant health risks that are covered under the declaration. And especially too, if you're immunocompromised. These, so it wouldn't be just the rent, it would pause the eviction case until after May 1st. And then you would sign at the bottom here, printed and dated. It's the New York State has made it very simple to fill out this declaration. But I will now share other languages. So this is the Hardship Declaration in Spanish. This is the Hardship Declaration in Korean. This is what it will look like. This is the declaration in Chinese in traditional and Chinese simplified. And you would get these copies of these declarations on the New York courts.gov website, and you should receive it from your landlord and the court if you have an active case. And I think that's mostly it. I will now want to talk about resources that tenants may have during the pandemic, because I know it is very hard for everyone out there. And there are some resources that can help you out during the pandemic. Okay. First being the Asian Bar of New York. We have a pro bono clinic, and these are the ways that you could contact the pro bono clinic, which is operating remotely at this time, by your choice of phone numbers. You call them, or you could, there's an email address that I will share in a few minutes. There is a COVID-19 Know Your Rights resource that is available in many languages, and their legal referral service too, if you have a different area of law. Next resource is the New York City Housing Helpline. This is created by the New York City Housing Resources Administration. It gives tenants and occupants and New York City residents an opportunity to call a helpline from 9 to 5 on Monday to Friday. Legal Aid Society and other nonprofit legal service providers such as Legal Service of New York City, Mobilization for Justice, NILAG, they staff these helplines to provide brief advice. And if you have an active case in housing court, you may be eligible for free representation from the Right to Counsel program. How you could access this housing helpline is by calling 311 and asking to speak to a housing advocate and providing information related to your case. And from there, the legal service provider will determine whether they could represent you in your case or not. But if you somehow, for some reason, you don't choose to go with a lawyer, or you do go with a lawyer, this is probably some of the ways that they be able to help you out. First being HRA. If you are in a non-payment case and you fell behind for several months of rent, and you just need to bring you back to square one in a zero balance, you can request a one-shot deal for your case. You will need to prove that you are living in the apartment and that you have a lease or some sort of agreement that allows you to stay there for a certain amount of time, preferably a year or two, and that you have an ability to pay rent going forward. If that's through employment, if you have certain benefits, or if you have a third party that could cover your rent, that would be a way of demonstrating paying rent going forward. If you don't have employment and you qualify for public assistance, you could apply and see if the city could help you with shelter payments that could cover some of your rent, and also STAT benefits that can help with your living expenses. And if you are a family member, or if you have a family with any minors, or you may be eligible, and you are on public assistance, you may be eligible for the FEPS program, which is a program run by HRA that could assist with paying rent as a housing subsidy that is similar to Section 8. Homebase is a zip code-based program run by HRA. They give funds to different community-based organizations that can assist with, similar to HRA, with paying for back rent by using private funds. Another housing subsidy program called City Fest, but that program has several different categories. So you need to speak to a housing advocate or a housing attorney to see if you would qualify. And Fasten. This is a relatively new program that can cover rental arrears for not only tenants with US citizenship, but also undocumented tenants in New York City. Another way you could find a way to pay back arrears is through charities. You could call our Google Housing Court Answers. They have a helpline that is run from 9 to 5, I believe from Monday to Thursday. And they could connect you with different charities around the city that could assist with paying rent. And if all else fails, you could call 311 and ask to be connected with charities that could pay for rent. And then these are the contacts again, and these are the emails for the Hardship Declaration. I'll give a few moments for people to either write it down or yeah. And just very briefly, emergencies. So these are the types of cases that are still happening in housing court, even though there's a stay. If you've been illegally locked out by out of your apartment, you need to get back to your premises. No heat and hot water, electricity. You could bring a HP action, and similar to that, if you're experiencing harassment by the building owner or your housing provider, a tenant could file harassment HP lawsuits in HP court, and other repair conditions are covered by HP actions. Now we'll take this time to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Rena and Jonathan. That was very comprehensive and up to date. There is a question that was typed in to the chat. I will read it out loud. It says, I am a landlord. My tenants have not paid since March 2020. They did not say they were affected by COVID-19, simply stopped making payment when I did not agree to give him a rent break. I did not evict them because my apartment will be empty. The lease ends in May 2021. Through my lawyer, I sue the tenants for non-payment. Initially, they were represented, but he appeared in court without a lawyer. What is my remedy? My lawyer says the court is not open yet.
Thank you, Karen. I can take the question. So the most important thing that I want to emphasize is that this is a information session. So whatever we say to you right now should not supersede your own lawyer's advice, because we don't have attorney-client relationship. So please refer to your lawyer. Earlier, when I said housing court is open, what that meant was it is open for operation. It is open for certain types of cases. But in this particular case where you had sued your tenant for non-payment of rent case, because of the new law that was passed in December of 2020, which the law is called COVID-19 Emergency Eviction and Foreclosure Prevention Act, any kind of non-payment case that is pending in housing court right now has been automatically stayed. What that means is for a certain period of time, 60 days from the day that the law was signed, housing court cannot hear any cases when it comes to non-payment of rent. So that particular stay will expire on February 26th of 2021. Again, that date is February 26th, not 16 of 2021. That particular 60 days was given so that tenants can return the COVID Hardship Declaration form that Jonathan discussed earlier in detail. If for some reason your tenants don't return that form to you or the court, then at that point, I'm sure your lawyers will advise you. At that point, the court may be able to hear your case. However, if the tenants do send the forms out to the court or you, then there's going to be another stay, and that stay is going to expire on May 1st. Now, how each court, and when I say each court, 5 boroughs, and then how each judge is handling stays varies. So that's the kind of question you should be asking your lawyer to find out whether you have already received a date sometime in May, sometime in June, sometime in March, or the court has basically said no cases to be heard, to be decided as to when the case will be heard, and you'll get a future court date. So the only type of cases that's being heard from the landlord side right now is nuisance holdover that Jonathan earlier talked about, basically where a tenant has caused allegedly tenant has caused some problems, and that you want to evict the tenant for that. That's the only type of case that is being heard. Housing court is open, but cases being heard is a different issue as opposed to having a open housing court. So I'm sorry that you're going through the situation. It's hard for everyone, landlord, tenant, everyone. It's hard because of the pandemic. Hopefully, you'll get a resolution soon.
Thank you, Rena. Another question that came in was, how likely will rent arrears be forgiven under the federal bailout proposed by President Biden?
I could try to answer that to the best of my abilities. So to my knowledge, I don't think there's any legislation that forgives or any rental payments at the moment. I think that there are some, I guess, in the stimulus package that President Biden is trying to pass, is to cover building owners and landlords that can assist with paying for, I guess, mortgage payments that could have been paid by the tenant, or rent by the tenant, and I don't think that there's anything right now on the federal level that covers rent or will forgive rent or cancel rent at the moment. If it's something to strive for, I would encourage, if you're a tenant, even if you're a landlord, to figure out a solution to on the state or the city and state and federal level to kind of come up with a solution, because everybody's hurting. Tenants, landlords, there needs to be a solution, and I don't think it's going to fix itself. I hope that answers your question.
Right. And just to add to Jonathan's, I believe that the President Biden's COVID stimulus plan, it has a proposal to extend the eviction moratorium to the end of September. But like Jonathan said, no provision to forgive rent. I think the hope is that with additional stimulus checks to individual families and with increased unemployment, that and assistance to small businesses, that will generate income from which somebody who's renting can pay their landlord. But his suggestion of advocating on the state and local level is a good one. I know that there was a New York State rent relief program that had just closed February 1st in order for tenants to be able to apply for rental assistance. And whether or not that's going to reopen or there's going to be more funding put into that, we don't know at this point. There was also a question earlier about how many languages does the Hardship Declaration, is it available in through the court website? And I believe it's 20 different languages that's available on the court website. If you are listening in one of the non-English channels, if you have a question, please feel free to raise your hand or unmute, and the language interpreter can relay your question to our speakers. All right, well, while we're waiting for some folks who may have questions, if you could go back, if I could trouble you, Jonathan, go back to that slide that had the pro bono resources on the Abney page. The one with the clinic and yes, that one. Okay, great. So I want to supplement what Jonathan had mentioned. There are 3 resources that are on the screen. The first is the Abney Pro Bono Remote Clinic. And like Jonathan said, if you have a question about a particular matter and you require just more information about what the procedure is, you can call those numbers, and we have volunteers who are able to speak in multiple languages who can help answer your question with information. Those individuals, however, won't be able to represent you in court. They can only provide you with some information. If you know that you need to hire an attorney, and if you can afford an attorney, and oftentimes the only advice I give individuals is that it's always better to proceed with counsel than without. Housing court is a very technical practice, and if you don't follow the right procedural steps, you can get your case dismissed, and then you have to start all over. So if you are in need of an attorney, the AABANY Legal Referral and Information Service, they will provide you with a referral to an attorney who will give you a consultation initially for a small fee. And afterwards, you can discuss whether or not you want to hire that attorney or not for your case. And the phone numbers are listed. There are intake coordinators who can listen to your request in multiple languages as well. And just lastly, right in the middle, Abney, through all of its volunteer lawyers, has put together these information sheets on how COVID-19 has impacted not only housing, but also immigration, the court operations, unemployment. It has information also about where you can get free meals if you need mental health services, if you are a victim of domestic violence. And all of that is compiled in English, Korean, Chinese, and Japanese on the website that you see, probono.abney.org. So we invite you to utilize that information. Many of the phone numbers that Jonathan had mentioned with respect to housing, where you can get more assistance, is also available on that Abney website. Okay, now were there any questions from the other interpreters? Okay, if not, I'm going to wrap up tonight's presentation. I want to thank Jonathan Hernandez and Rena Gurung for just sharing your experience and your knowledge with all of us tonight. This webinar was organized by the Government and Public Sector Committee, as well as the Pro Bono and Community Service Committee of the Asian American Bar Association. This information that was given is general legal information and should never replace the advice that you get from a lawyer. I want to give special thanks to Kwok Ang and Xinyi Shen and Irene Kim for volunteering their time and their skills to serve as our interpreters. And a special thank you to Francis Chin for just working his internet technology magic to make this interpretation service possible and our presentation tonight. This is the first time that we are trying this function, so we appreciate his help and we appreciate all of your patience if some of the audio was a little bit inconsistent. So thank you very much. Please follow up with the resources that we gave you and continue to stay safe and to be well. Good night.